legislative proposal to solve it. And so I went to Dick and I said, listen, what do you do about the swaps market? And what he said to me was, he said, Dylan, you have to go into the swaps market and one, force it onto an exchange, and then two, identify all the corporate and sovereign debt, all the private and national debt that exists, and then look at all the third-party swaps that are in excess of the underlying value of the debt market. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense.
And so he says, take a look at all the swaps that, this is Dick Grasso talking, take a look at all the swaps that exist in excess of the underlying market, reclassify it as online gaming, because it's not actually anything, and cancel all the debt. So what you do is gambling is illegal unless it's ordained by the Gaming Commission. So what you do is you say, okay, you want to have swaps. The only swaps you can do are ones that actually insure debt, and you can only have swaps that insure debt that have capital and are posted on an exchange. If there's swaps that don't have capital and don't insure debt, it will be reclassified as online gaming, and we will cancel it. And that is the easiest debt to cancel, that is the least harmful to all of us, and immediately ends this. Because this entire business is based, the stock trading business doesn't make money anymore. The bond trading business doesn't make money anymore, because technology has annihilated the profit margins of all of Wall Street's traditional businesses, which is why they are exploiting the loophole that is the dark market for credit default swaps as their primary money-making machine. And it is why the place we have to focus our attention is to push that up. Anyway,
what do you think of ETFs?
ETFs have the same problem that credit default swaps have, where they create a capital momentum, an investment flow into assets that don't actually have any value.
No value.
And as long as you are pushing money into assets without value as a speculative device, whether it's a swap, you don't have capital, and if you don't have capital, you don't have capitalism.
So why the market's value so high?
The market's value is so high because right now the market's value is driven by the central bank's ability to inflate the debt to preserve the fraud of its integrity. So what's happening is, when there's bailouts, there's $600 trillion in that swaps market casino. That $600 trillion in the swaps market casino, when it goes upside down, the government can't tell which 10% of that casino is mission-critical insurance for food, for milk, for wheat, for heating oil, and which 90% is complete garbage. And as a result, the Wall Streeters walk in and say, you got to pay the whole casino, because you can't tell which 10% you actually have to pay. And as a result, we end up having to pay out the whole casino. We pay everybody off, and then they cover it up by printing money to create the appearance of value in the stock market, when the stock market is nothing. The thing is, there's the stock market, which is value, and then there's the credit market, which is debt. The stock market's pretty transparent. It's got very good mechanics. It's a very well-intentioned and very useful machine for solving how to deploy money. But the stock market is only as good as the foundation that it's built on, and the foundation everything is built on is the central banking system and the credit market. And the central banking system and the credit market is an absolute fraud and is under the influence and control of our government, that is then using that to perpetuate the fraud that we're living in, that we all know we're living in, which is, I think, why we're all here.
Yeah. Amen. Sending food prices through the roof.
Well, what happens is so they cover it up. They print currency. The currency printing inflates commodity prices. The commodity price inflation is a pain in our ass, but for the billion people on the earth who spend 70% of their income every day on food, like the people in Cairo or the people in Africa, when we, to cover up our own financial problems, double or triple the cost of rice, tortillas, pasta, couscous, whatever people eat around the world as their staples, you put people in a situation where suddenly the poorest billion or 2 billion or 3 billion people in the world can't eat in order for our elite to cover up their ongoing fraud and theft. And that is sort of the stakes. And so when people say it costs 19 trillion, what I say is, if you look at the asset price distortion in every house in America, when you look at the misallocation of capital across every industry in America because of the availability of cheap fraudulent credit, and then you look at the cost to the world of the money printing to cover that up, your cost is easily into the hundreds of trillions of dollars. Even if you're looking at the nominal, the actual material cost at the central bank, at its peak by the calculation calculations that I saw with Naomi Klein and all the rest of these characters was $23.7 trillion is what we put up to support the system at its worst. So we didn't have to spend all that money.
Right.
But there was a point where the whole thing was going down, where we basically said, we're good for anything, just to try to make the machine stop, which is what we did in February of 2009 when Bernanke, after he'd done all these things, so remember they did 9 months, right? They're like TARP, TALF, bond insurance, commercial paper funding facility, short-term lending, long-term lending. They had like 70 programs. TARP gets the headlines because they had a vote, but that's TARP.
Yeah, the TARP headline.
TARP is a joke. Okay?
Yeah, total joke.
TARP is the red herring.
Yeah.
But the point is, even after doing all those programs, the market was still in a free fall, and it wasn't until the central bankers came out and basically said, listen, there's no amount of money we're not going to provide to the AAA financial institutions, so you all need to relax. And if you look at that point, the markets went like this, because they were like, oh, it doesn't matter that we know that the equity is worthless because the credit market is a fraud, because we have the reserve currency status and they can print as much money as they want and cover it up, and the only thing that will hurt us is if the dollar ever breaks or if the people rebel. Well, the people are rebelling, and the dollar right now is very much intact, but the problem is when the currency goes, if the currency goes, which is what China is intending,
right,
then what happens is...
What do you mean by China intending?
China's ambition is to replace the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency for trading in commodities. That's a stated goal. Their first goal is to expand China's reserve currency status to the Pacific Rim as a regional trading currency, let's say for the next 10 years, and then validate their regional trading currency and start to move it around. The way it would work would be like this. Basically, the Americans are a bunch of yeehaws, is what the world sees, right? I can't solve problems, they're all yelling at each other, they're printing money, they're bought, the place is a joke. The Chinese have an opportunity to go to the Saudi Arabians, who sell the oil, to the Brazilians, who sell oil and a wide variety of commodities, to the Indians, who are one of the biggest markets. So you have India, Brazil, the Middle East, and whoever I'm leaving out, China. They can get together at a certain point and say, let's create a global commodity currency, or a global trading currency, excuse me.
Right.
And that global trading currency becomes a bypass mechanism to trade oil, wheat, all those things. As soon as that bypass currency exists, the U.S. dollar collapses. Because now there's no reason, now everybody's like, why does Saudi Arabia want to deal with China and U.S. dollar denominated barrels of oil when the U.S. dollar is being corrupted by the American government on a level that nobody's ever seen?
You heard what
right now they have no choice.
You heard what Putin said about us.
No, what did he say?
He called us a parasite on the world because for the Fed
for the printing.
Yeah.
Now, Putin is right. The issue with Russia is that they are at least as corrupt, if not more corrupt, than we are.
Yeah.
And so,
but they don't have the reserve currency, and they're jealous.
If Russia had the reserve currency, they'd be printing it too.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just take it easy.
Yeah.
But Russia's the one that I don't worry. I worry about the least in the sense that I actually worry about least in the most, because Russia has the problem of being an oil-rich nation that has a corrupt oligarch government, that has a massive heroin habit, that is basically the painkiller for the masses in Russia. Remember, Afghanistan grows heroin. Afghanistan sells heroin to Iran. Iran takes the heroin to Russia. Russia buys the heroin. If you wanted to stop the heroin business in Afghanistan, you'd have to take the heroin off the streets of Russia. Because the same way that America's the market for marijuana from Mexico, you're never going to stop the marijuana market until you stop Americans from buying marijuana. You're never going to stop the heroin market in Afghanistan until you stop the Russians from buying heroin.
You get the American military out of there.
Well, what happens is the beautiful deal that is set up is that basically the Russians can buy heroin for weapons from the Cold War. They take the weapons from the Cold War, give them to the Iranians. The Iranians say, hey, here's a batch of heroin. The Iranians then take the weapons over to the border at Afghanistan, and they say, hey, you guys want some guns? And they're like, we're looking for guns. He's like, if you give me a couple of 100 pounds of heroin, I'll give you some guns. And we have this transaction that's constantly happening between Afghanistan and Russia, using Iran as the middleman. Now, the reality, you're going to be like, well, we got to get Iran. Or if you get Iran, there'll be another middleman. There's always another drug dealer. And it's that sort of dynamic that I think that is the open source problem solving system. In other words, it's the ability to understand all these things and know that you're not not going to solve it, but that you're not going to even be able to begin to solve it until you understand it. And I think that what we're seeing because of these machines and all the rest of it is everybody's ability to understand these things has exploded.
Right.
And everybody's going to understand more of it over the next 5 years. And ultimately, we're going to solve it for that reason. Because if I have my friend from Texas in the Tea Party, and I have my friend from wherever Goldi's from with his friggin' dreadlocks in San Francisco, and you guys both agree, and you got me with my short hair and my Valentino suits, and I agree, and then you have old, young, and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
It's a matter of time. It's not a matter of whether this is going to happen. It's a question of when it's going to happen and whether we can do it in a way that harnesses the modern digital wave to exert ourselves massively without having to ultimately resort to violence, which is really my greatest fear. And I think that it's like people say peace is hard. Obama said peace is hard. I say war is harder.
Yeah, war is easy. War is easy in this country.
You want to address these issues by the ballot box, not the ammo box. That's what's important. And if you recall the first stuff that he said about the gambling, if you go to folks back home where I'm from, that is something that's hard for them to understand. So you would interpret that as saying, look, all these stuff that people are doing on Wall Street is basically gambling. It's a casino. And if they want to regulate casino gambling on the streets and the internet, they need to regulate it here also. It's the same thing. Basically the same thing.
Absolutely right. Tell me your name.
It's Calvin Roy, right out from Lott, Texas.
Thanks, bud.
There's not a lot there, trust me.
We got to take notice that
how many times have you heard secure the housing market? I can't do this.
I need a bar. I need a bar.